Okay guys, today we are going to work on adding and subtracting fractions when they have unlike denominators. So we've learned in class how to add and subtract fractions when the denominators are the same. So in a fraction like this with the denominators the same, we know all that we do is add the numerators. 2 plus 1 is 3, and we leave the denominator the same. So when we get our sum, we have it where the numerators are added and the denominator stays the same because the denominator was an equivalent denominator. And when you have a numerator and a denominator that are equal, you know that that is equal to 1 whole. So now today we're going to talk about adding and subtracting fractions when they don't have the same denominator. That would be adding something like 1/5 plus 2/3. And so when we were to add those, you would see that those have different denominators. When they have different denominators, we have to force them to have the same denominator. And the way that we do that is we do our equivalency charts. So I do an equivalency chart for 1/5, and I do an equivalency chart for 2/3. Remember, we've talked about how I'm not really sure how many spaces to make the equivalency chart go, but I'm just going to guess about 4 or 5 to start with, just so I can have an idea of see if I can find a common denominator. So when we do our equivalency table, we start with our numerator and we find all the multiples of our numerator. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now we do the multiples of our denominator. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. We do the exact same thing with the second fraction that we wrote down to do an equivalency chart for that. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. So now we have two equivalency charts. Remember in class that we talked about how these are equivalency charts because all of these fractions simplify down to 1/5. 4/20ths goes down to 1/5, 3/15ths, 8/12ths goes down to 2/3, 4/6 goes down to 2/3. These are all fractions that are equivalent to 2/3, and these are all fractions that are equivalent to 1/5. Now, when we go and try to find, the reason for doing these tables was to make these denominators be the same. So now we have to find what's called a common denominator. So I start with my denominators in my first table and I say, here's a 5. Is there a 5 down here? No. What about a 10? Nope. What about a 15? Yes. There is a fraction down here with a denominator of 15, and there's a fraction up top with a denominator of 15. Now that we have found two fractions with the same denominator, then now we can do the operation that we originally intended to do. So I can write down the fraction 3/15ths. And I can write down plus 10/15ths. And I can add them up. Remember when we add the numerators, 10 plus 3 is 13. And the denominators never change, so we leave them the same. So my answer is 13/15ths. But I'm never done when I just do that, because now I have to see if the fraction is simplified. So that's when you would go through all of your simplification rules to make sure. You see, is there a 1 on top? Nope. Are they both prime? Well, let's think about our song. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. That one's prime. 17, 19. Nope, they're not both prime. Then we think about the next rule. Is the top prime and it won't go into the bottom? Well, the top is prime. Will it go into the bottom? Nope. So that's the rule I identify as the rule that proves that this is already simplified. So to go through the steps again, to be able to add or subtract fractions, I have to make them have the exact same denominator. So when they do not have the same denominator, because I've been given two fractions without the same denominator, I have to force them to have the same denominator. And that means I have to find a fraction equivalent to 1/5 and a fraction equivalent to 2/3 that have the same denominator. So I do my equivalency tables. I draw a sideways T-chart out, and I find all the multiples of my numerator, multiples of my denominator. Multiples of my numerator, multiples of my denominator. Then I find a common denominator. Now when you do that part, you may find more than one common denominator, and that's okay. Just pick the smallest. And then I take my two fractions and I add them together and make sure that my answer is simplified. And if you've forgotten your simplification rules, go ahead and watch the video over simplification rules.